Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining my Facebook Live and this really important training on the direct request process. I'm going to give Facebook a few moments to send out the notifications. And if you're joining me now, hello. And I would love for you to share your thoughts below this live stream and let me know if you have any questions about the whole eviction process and the direct request process. So, okay, wonderful. So the whole kind of climate around tenancy and landlords is very filled with fear for a lot of landlords. A lot of landlords are sitting, living in fear. They're letting the tenants run the show when it comes to their peace of mind, their enjoyment of their home, their right to actually be the homeowner. And also to because they are fearful about what can happen with the system that is very biased and very unbalanced, and it tends to vilify landlords. So if you are a landlord who lives in perpetual fear around what's going on out there, what the system is doing, what the government is doing, what the tenants are doing, um, there is no way that you're going to have your peace of mind. There's no way that you're going to feel like you are truly empowered. You are living like a victim and not necessarily someone who truly knows how to run a business. So if you're joining me right now, I want to talk to you about how to be an empowered landlord, how to run a business instead of running a toy home and or a toy castle mentality, or having a toy home and a toy castle mentality. And one of the key things that began to happen for me last year when I was faced with a very toxic tenant was that I began to become empowered. And if you don't have the knowledge at the level even of the average person who is answering your question at the RTB, then of course you're going to be very, very powerless, and or you're going to feel like a victim of the system and what's going on with the tenants. So by and large, there are amazing landlords. There are also amazing tenants. And also, if you've been a landlord for some time, at least 5, 6 years, maybe 7 years or more, what you're going to notice is that there is a distinct difference in the climate and what's going on now versus what's going on then. So there's a system that is conditioning and programming tenants to be a certain way towards landlords. And a lot of times landlords don't know how to act in a professional way, and also in a way where they are actually acting and taking actions faster than they should. So let's talk about the direct request process. And I keep educating landlords around the system and around the process, and to understand what needs to happen and how you need to act like you are running a business and not necessarily a charity. Okay. All right. So the direct request process is something that a lot of landlords don't know about and they don't actually use. And if you don't know about the direct request process, you will give the tenants multiple different chances and let them run the show, because you're not necessarily taking the strategic actions that you need to take. So the direct request process is actually a loophole for landlords. It's an actual genius part of the system that can work in your favor if you know how to make it work. So this part of the system, actually, I'm going to applaud the government for making this part of the system. There's a lot of things that they've made that they haven't done right. But what they've done right is that they have created a direct request process, which means that you can bypass needing to actually have a hearing with the tenant present in order for you to get an order of possession. Now, there are requirements around the direct request process. The direct request process is when you are going to present a case before an arbitrator. And in order for you to do that effectively, you're going to have enough evidence when you're presenting a case, because you're not going to be granted a hearing. And the tenant doesn't need to necessarily attend the hearing. So everything that you are doing that's leading up to a direct request or leading up to actually serving a notice for eviction is going to be very important. And I think this is where a lot of landlords don't prepare themselves correctly. And I'm speaking to myself because last year, before I knew better, I really did not prepare myself correctly. So I want you to think about, before I go into the direct request process a little bit more, I want you to think about everything that you are doing that's leading up to that event, and or everything that you need to do that's going to be leading up to you serving an eviction notice. So when landlords serve an eviction notice, they don't realize that the notice is actually a legal notice. And everything that they're doing that's leading up to that legal notice needs to be done strategically, which means that you shouldn't just go into handing over a piece of paper without a really well thought out plan. Now, if you have already served an end of tenancy notice, I understand if you haven't had a chance and or the knowledge and or foresight to have a very good plan beforehand. And a lot of times landlords, they panic because they've served the notice and then they get hit by something else and they don't know actually how to deal with it. So before I talk about what you need to do, the direct request, I want to really just drive home the fact that you need to have a very good plan. And I call this eviction planning. And I refer to this as eviction education, which means that before you start the process of serving that notice, you need to have a documentation process. Okay, beforehand, you'll need to know what's going to happen in every single scenario after you've served that notice, as well as what can happen up to the Supreme Court level. Okay, so first off, before the direct request comes, it's all about you having documentation, you actually having a very good case, you having a well thought out strategy that you're going to be using when you're going to serve this notice, even if the tenant is a good tenant, even if the tenant is a great tenant. A good tenant could turn into a bad tenant really fast. And I think for a lot of landlords, they don't realize a good tenant can turn into a terrible tenant, a toxic tenant really fast. Like you don't know what people will be like when they feel like their backs are up against the wall. So if you're going to rely on, this person being a good tenant and you're not necessarily going to take the correct action steps as a landlord, then you might be caught off guard. Okay, so you need to have a good plan before you lead up to the direct request process. Now, how do you actually engage in the direct request process? You'll need to serve a notice. I'm going to talk about two specific notices here because the 2-month for landlord use is not going to be eligible for the direct request process. However, there are multiple different clauses that might be eligible for the direct request process. So the 10-day notice for end of tenancy, okay, is eligible for the direct request process. The 30-day notice for end of tenancy is eligible for the direct request process. So 10-day, 30-day, I'm just going to talk about those two right now. So if you've served a 10-day notice, you're going to give the tenant 5 days to pay up and or dispute. And a lot of times what happens for landlords is that they're not checking with the RTB to see if the tenant has disputed. You should be checking perhaps maybe 3 days after you've served this notice when it's considered served. So remember, if you served it by email, you have to wait 3 days for it to be considered served. If you serve it in person, then it's considered served the very same day. Okay, so now you've served the notice and you should be checking, calling the RTB, residential tenancy branch, you should be checking to see if the tenant has disputed it. So usually, by day 3 and or day 3 of you having served it and received, and also by the time that they're supposed to dispute it, like for example, day 6, Okay, so if they have 5 days, so day 6, so you call the RTB to see if they have disputed it. You need to do that in order for you to see if you can go ahead with a direct request. So if you have given them a 30-day notice for end of tenancy, what you're going to do is that you're going to give them 10 days. Okay, you have to give them the 10-day window. And then again, by day 3 and or day 11, you're going to call the RTB to see if the tenant has disputed that notice. So when you make sure that the tenant hasn't disputed that notice, you need to have your ducks in a row in order for you to then serve a direct request. So here's what a lot of landlords do. They actually serve the 10-day notice. They don't call to see if the tenant has disputed it. And they don't actually move ahead with a direct request process because they're hoping that the tenant is just going to move within a 10-day period or within whatever period, like 10, 12-day period that they've given them. Okay, so most landlords, what they do is that they sit and they do not act. And that's why there is a climate where landlords are very, very disrespected because they don't respect you if you're not going to actually follow through and take very specific action steps according to what the law is telling you to do. And so therefore, mostly landlords are not acting swiftly. Swiftly. You must act swiftly. It's a business that you have, not a charity. So landlords are not acting swiftly, which means to act swiftly means that you're going to check again to see if the tenant has disputed it. Especially if the tenant is like, I'm not leaving, I'm not going anywhere. You know that they are trying to build themselves up for a fight or they're up for a fight. Now, after you've called RTB and they have not disputed it, you'll need a few things in order for you to start the direct request process. You need to have and make sure that your tenancy agreement is solid, right? Whatever it is that you've done with regards to having them rent your property. You need to make sure that when you have served that 10-day end of tenancy and or that 30-day end of tenancy, you have a proof of service document. As a matter of fact, I'm going to see if I can actually put the links below this video to help you understand the documents that you need to have alongside you serving the tenant the notice. The number one thing that I think a lot of landlords miss is that they don't have a proof of service document. That then they have a witness sign. If you don't have a proof of service document, RTB is not going to consider that you've served it. As a matter of fact, it's just not going to be seen as if it is served. So I've had landlords having to go and backtrack and make sure that they have filled out the proof of service document. So tenancy agreement, the actual notice, you need that for the direct request, the notice that you've served the tenant with. You need the proof of service document. That demonstration shows that you have served the tenant correctly and the method through which you served it, and that they've received this legal notice to end tenancy. And plus, on top of that, what I also help landlords with is create a documentation process, like an actual strategy and documentation plan. Because when you go and approach the RTB, if you don't actually have a very good case that you're going to present to them so that you can ask and request for an eviction, the way that the system is working nowadays, it's going to be very, very difficult and challenging for landlords to get through to make sure that they get the order of possession. Okay, so 30-day end of tenancy is the same thing. You have to wait for a period of time, so it's 10 days. Most people don't realize that if you've waited 10 days and the tenant hasn't disputed, and especially the tenant is digging their heels in, and or you're not sure. Actually, I think all landlords nowadays, before maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, I think before it was different. but you have to demonstrate that you're serious about and backing up what it is that you say you're going to do. So most landlords don't know and they don't realize that they can do this. If you've served the 30-day end of tenancy and um, 10 days has lapsed, which means that they have 10 days to dispute your service of the notice. On day 11, you can apply for a direct request. Instead of waiting 15, 16, 20 days for the tenant to move, which a lot of times they actually don't move. They don't care. Right. They're like, I don't care. I don't have to move. I don't have to go anywhere. They know that the gods that rule the RTB and the gods that make the MLA, the laws, the MLAs, these gods are in their favor. So I don't care. I don't have to go anywhere. System backs me up. So if you're kind of like twiddling your thumb and you're not taking swift direct action, it's a direct request, which means I need to take swift direct action steps. I need to ensure that I really am going to get my property back and or this tenant really does move. To ensure that the tenant really does move, what you do is that by day 11, okay, I'm talking about now the 30-day end of tenancy. By day 11, okay, of that notice, and after you've checked with the RTB to make sure that they have not disputed it, it's really important that you take swift direct action and apply for a direct request for an order of possession. This is to ensure, okay, this is to offer you security and to ensure, to make sure that the tenant know that you got to go. You have to leave this place. Okay. So what I see often that happens for landlords, and I remember when I was in that mindset, and it really is a mindset shift. It's a mindset shift that actually needs to happen just across the whole of BC. And I'm sure like in other provinces too, but when it comes to landlords, there's a mindset problem that we have. So the mindset shift that needs to happen is this. And if we send this message to tenants over and over and over again, if all landlords come together and they begin to send a very strong, powerful message that I'm going to use the legal means and every legal means possible. And essentially the tenants now, they actually have and or they know that this is how landlords work, right? The landlord will use every and any legal means possible to ensure that they secure the rightful ownership back and the rightful space back of their property. And if landlords do this enough, I think what's going to happen is that the laws will have to change. The thing is that landlords, and I'm pretty sure if we were to do like a poll, if we were to look into the RTB system, what we're going to see is a very, very small percentage of landlords going for the direct request process when they've served a 10-day end of tenancy and or when they've served a 30-day end of tenancy. Okay, so on day 11, you go for the direct request. That's what you do as a landlord. Oh, the tenant is like this, or the tenant is like that, or the tenant needs more time. The tenant. Okay. So this nice guy, nice girl persona needs to go when you're running a business, and it needs to be that you are going to follow the law and you're going to ensure that you are moving according to a certain timeline that is going to have you get a certain result. The reason why I keep telling landlords this is because a tenant can backtrack and actually mess you up when it comes to damages and or when it comes to money. Okay, they can actually stop paying their rent. Let's say that you don't act right away and they've slept through it, they thought it out, and now they're like, this isn't fair. I'm not getting out of here. They call the RTB. The RTB tells them, oh yeah, you can actually dispute this notice. And now it's day 12. them haven't received it. Okay. And usually what happens here is that the RTB system is so messed up that it will automatically trigger a hearing for these tenants. Now, if you had acted and applied for direct request, for example, on day 11, and your files and your application is in the system, if the tenant tries to dispute it on day 12, 13, 14, 15, okay, so this is why, again, they dispute it and you wait 5 months or 6 months to get them out. Why? Because if you haven't applied for direct request and the tenant disputes the notice, you cannot apply for direct request anymore. So you have to preempt this whole process and make sure that you are protecting your asset and you're protecting your investment. Okay, so what I was saying here is that if the tenant still applies for a dispute on day 13, day 14, because they've slept on it, they're now pissed off, they're looking out in the market and they're like, oh my God, I'm going to have to pay $500 more for rent. I don't want to do that. So now they're going to put up a fight. If you had gone ahead or if you did the direct request process, it doesn't matter. Okay? So now it doesn't matter if they have now gone ahead and disputed this notice. It doesn't matter because now you've applied for a direct request and it's in the system. And usually, once you've applied, it's in the system. You have about 1 to 2 weeks to wait to receive a decision from the RTB around you getting your order of possession. So again, the direct request is to ensure that this doesn't drag on for months and months and months and months and bloody months. Okay. And especially if the tenant is not so professional that they know how to actually, use the system for their benefit, like my tenant did. So I'm telling you, just from learning so much around this process and understanding this process, how would I have gone about certain things? Okay. Now I finally got her out with a writ and a bailiff and had to go to the Supreme Court. But if I were to deal with a certain situation, and or how I help and or counsel landlords that you act quickly. And the reason why you have to act quickly is because time is not on your side. And once the clock starts ticking, then it's either that you're going to leverage to help you get this process finished sooner rather than later or not. So the tenant now applies for dispute resolution, probably, day 13, 14, or whatever, after you've now filed for direct request. You're still going to be in the system and being considered for your order of possession. Now, let's just say that you now have gotten your order of possession 1 to 2 weeks later. It doesn't matter that the tenant has applied for a dispute resolution. You can still proceed with your order of possession. So now you get your order of possession. Yay, that's what all landlords want. I remember when I got my order of possession, I was just like, hallelujah. I was just in I was in so much joy around it. Okay, that's finally, good grief. By the way I got it was through a hearing because she had triggered a dispute within the timeline. Okay, that's why I'm like, the clock is ticking for landlords. Let's just say now, if the tenant did not dispute, you now have your order of possession from you actually moving through the direct request process. It is a great sigh of relief. But you need to know what's going to happen after that. And I think maybe in another series or another session, I'll talk a little bit more about that in depth. But what I wanted to come back to was this. If you have gotten your order of possession and the person, the tenant, actually still tries to go ahead for a dispute, it doesn't matter because you can proceed with your order of possession. And even if they have a dispute that is 2-3 months down the road, they would have moved out. You would have moved them out. Okay. You would have moved them out with your order of possession because now you have the right, the legal right for them to get out of your property. So they could be in another person's property and wherever else, waiting around for their dispute hearing, you see? But you would have secured your property and you would have gotten the right to have your property back. So actually, I'm just going to see if there are any questions here. Um, Let me just see here. Oh, thanks. Thank you so much. All right. So, all right. I'm actually listening back to myself on Facebook. Uh, and by the way, this live is only streaming in our private group here. Okay, let me just go back down. Okay. So if you're watching live, say hello and feel free to ask any questions. And this is why actually I created this group because I just absolutely love the ability to just stream live and to share based on my own time, my own schedule. And I'm just gonna go here as I'm just seeing a reaction here. Oh, you're so welcome, Sana. So yeah, I'm hoping that this is giving you lots and lots of info. You are not a charity. We are not a charity. We get vilified, we get just bullied, we get attacked on the daily from the media, from this system, from our politicians who are an absolute joke, from the tenants. And it's time to stop that. It's time to end that. It's time to actually act like a professional landlord. Now, here's one key thing I'm going to share with you, and then I'm going to wrap this up a little bit. Um, when you are going to go through a process with a tenant, it's a legal process that you're going to go through, not an emotional, reactive, just all over the place response. And so, therefore, what a lot of landlords do is that they give themselves away. They get very emotional with the tenant and they begin to tell the tenant what they don't need to know. Let me just put it like that. They begin to start to say things to the tenant like they are actually threatening the tenant, right? If you don't do this, I'm going to do this. That's called being emotionally reactive and not being a professional. The tenant should be on an as need to know basis. There are a whole lot of things that landlords are sharing and saying to tenants that they don't need to know. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to serve. And you're just, this is all in the ego. This is all from this emotional reactive space. And I get it. You know, you're probably losing money. You're probably stressed out. You probably can't sleep. You probably, you know, they're affecting your mental health. They're doing a bunch of stuff. They're damaging your property. I get it. However, the way that you're going to approach this process must be without having your emotional reactivity involved. And if you are able to contain your emotions, like do not tell the tenant you're going to serve them a direct request. Just do it. Don't tell the tenant you're going to, I'm going to serve you a 10-day end of tenancy. Just do it. I'm going to serve you a 30-day for cause because you're not listening to me. Just do it. You act and then you respond in a professional manner throughout the process when you act. Okay. So you don't actually, go around trying to say to the tenant, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do. It's like you're just uttering baseless and or threats, especially for a lot of landlords, and they're not backing it up with anything. They just back it up with a piece of paper. They don't back it up from here. They don't back it up from actually having strategy, true planning, a really good process put together. So what the tenants are looking for is that you're going to emotionally react and actually emotionally vomit all over the place. For lack of a better word, I just need to put that in your mind. Emotionally vomit all over the place. Instead of being contained with your emotions and instead of being a professional. So whenever you're going through a process of eviction, you have to be very careful what I said this in the last video, you have to be careful what you say. You have to be careful that you don't incriminate yourself. You have to understand that when you are faced, for example, with a dispute, it's a legal hearing. They don't even permit you to record things, okay? This is because it's a legal hearing. And if you incriminate yourself along the way by text messages, by WhatsApp, by email, and or just, spew everything at the tenant, the more you go ahead in a place where, or with an attitude where you're not contained correctly, the more you are building a case against yourself that is going to be in favor of the tenant. Because once the tenant comes on, if it's a dispute and they start telling a story, the landlord did this to me, the landlord did that to me, the landlord this, and they bullied me and they pushed me and they this and that, whatever. You don't want that to be against you. So if you can't control your emotions, if you can't contain yourself, if you can't respond in a way that is going to be in your favor, you really need to look at why as a landlord. So after a period of time, I began to zip it with my tenant. Okay. And after you are inside of a process and you've gone through it, you know and understand how to behave. You begin to behave in a manner where you understand, like you think on a higher level, you outsmart the whole system, you outsmart the process, you act in a different way. Okay. As a matter of fact, most of the landlords who come to me, they have a complete attitude adjustment when it comes to me helping them with their mindset, with their thinking, with their words, with how they act, with how they are with this process. And in a way that's very gentle, right? Just like I'm talking to you right now. And then you begin to actually release needing to be spun out emotionally, and you begin to actually take very good action steps that's going to be in favor of your process. So I'm just going to check in one more time. If you have any other questions, you can let me know. And you're so yeah, I'm just so loving the responses from a lot of the landlords. So yeah, you're so welcome again for helping and assisting. And this is again something I really enjoy doing. Aside from having my own business, I really enjoy just teaching and sharing. And I really want for us to build a community together. So invite landlords to this group and let's build a community together. Let's empower each other. Let's come together. Let's stand together. I want to offer more trainings and more teachings. Review this training over and over and over again, because this is really important. The direct request process, very, very important for landlords. So review this training over and over and over again, and click the link. I'm going to put some links below to educate yourself, and let us all stand together. All right. Until next